This is Dr. Jerome Corsi, and today is Friday. It's October 13th, 2023, at thetruthcentral.com. We have a guest today. It's my good friend, Joel Gilbert. And Joel is a filmmaker. We've been working together for years, and I love Joel's work. And Joel, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jerry. So good to be with you. Thank you.
Now, first, I've got to ask you, before we get into what we really want to talk about today, which is your new book and movie on Michelle Obama being the next candidate 2024 for the Democratic Party. And it's an exciting topic. I can't wait to get into it. I have to ask you first, with what's going on in the Middle East, and you and I were both very familiar with the Middle East. What's your take on it, Joel? What are you thinking?
Yeah, what's happening today, you have to look at in the context of the collapse of the Israeli policy. The Israeli left chose to negotiate with the PLO terror group, the Palestine Liberation Organization, and hand over their territory of Gaza and limited in the West Bank with the fantasy that if they gave these territories to these terror groups, that their peace would break out. Now, as soon as they handed over the territory, the PLO initiated a war against Israel. And that's been going on since 2005. Every couple years, they initiate another war, and the Israelis bomb them back until they kind of cry uncle and say, okay, well, we've had enough. And the Israelis aren't motivated to go back in and take over the territories because they figure they'll lose several hundred soldiers in the process. And they're promised by Western backers in Europe and the United States that they'll give money to the Palestinian terror groups and that will then quell their thirst for future war. Every time they did that, they just kicked it down the road a couple of years. So the attack by Hamas on Israeli settlements is the final straw in that failed policy of the Israeli left and their fantasy of being able to achieve peace with terror groups. So that's essentially the background to what's happening today. And had the Israeli left with the support of the United States and Europeans had not pushed this fantasy on Israel, none of this would be happening today.
So it's a case again of appeasement failing. And
well, it's appeasement. Leftists have these fantasies about reality. You saw that in New York City, there was an Antifa and BLM supporter that was murdered by a black youth with a knife in the middle of the night. Now, had somebody else been murdered, he would have probably celebrated that murder and said it was because the black person with the knife didn't have enough money growing up or didn't have enough opportunities. So the left around the world lives on fantasies, and these fantasies end up blowing up in their face. Ironically, most of the families of the hostages right now in Gaza are peaceniks, people that believed in this fantasy of making a peace with terror groups. The Israeli left still believes in some of these concepts. So it's a worldwide phenomenon of political fantasy, and it always blows up in your face. Look at Joe Biden. After 2 years of an open border, it blew up in his face. All the Democrat cities are begging him to close the border, and he's got to build a wall now. So it's just the nature of these leftist fantasies that ends up destroying the very people that had the fantasies in the first place.
One more question before we get to your book and movie. To what extent do you think Iran is behind this?
There's no question that the Iranians are the military and financial backers of Hamas, of Hezbollah, and they're the ones with a regional agenda. I think that they were threatened by the Israeli rapprochement with the Gulf states, with Saudi Arabia in particular, and they wanted to, prevent that from happening, and causing a war and atrocities and retaliation is the very thing that polarizes the Islamic world. They know that, and I think they were definitely behind it. And I think Israel, once they finish in Gaza, need to retaliate against the Iranians.
Well, it's going to be a mess, and it's going to be very dangerous, and it's going to escalate, and we'll watch it very carefully. But let's get into your book and movie, and again, let's raise a question to begin with. You've been working on Obama, as I have, going back into 2008. You've done an enormous amount of research.
Yeah.
What gave you the idea here to get into Michelle Obama being the candidate for 2024? Everybody's saying, well, she's not political. She doesn't really want to run.
Well, I certainly knew from back in 2008 that Michelle was extremely political. She was more political than Barack. She was a better speaker. She was a better politician. She gave speeches to massive crowds, bigger than Barack's speeches. I knew that her father was a politician. He was a precinct captain in Chicago working for the Democrat Party machine with a patronage job. That means he had a job where he was paid at the water department pretty much to do nothing except to try to convince the black population to vote for the white liberal Democrats. That was his main job. And that Michelle pretty much married her father. She married another politician, and Barack Obama. And I recalled that it was when Michelle was giving these very nasty anti-American speeches all over the country in 2008 that she went over the top and said, for the first time in my life, I'm proud of my country because Barack won a primary. Now, she said a lot worse things than that, but the media picked up on that. And that's when the Obama campaign told her, say, look, we could lose the election because people are going to hate you. So she said the next day she got a speechwriter and she said, okay, I hate politics and I just want to be the mom in chief. So she kept up that behind the scenes role for many years and became this very beloved figure, probably the most popular first lady, popular person in the country for that matter. But I also noticed that as soon as Donald Trump got elected, Michelle started pursuing the very same endeavors that Barack did before he became president. Barack had a voter registration organization called Project Vote in Chicago. Sure enough, Michelle started something called When We All Vote, backed by the Soros gang for $26 million to register voters. Barack wrote 2 autobiographies, Dreams from My Father and The Audacity of Hope. Sure enough, Michelle wrote 2 autobiographies, Becoming, which was a big bestseller. It's also a movie on Netflix, and her follow-up autobiography called The Light We Carry. And lastly, Barack was the keynote speaker who introduced John Kerry at the 2004 Democrat election. There was Michelle Obama introducing Joe Biden. That's the person that they pretty much set up to be the next nominee. So she's copying the same formula that Barack did. She's working on these constituent groups of minorities and women. She's got 100 million social media followers. And she's all politics all the time. And you can see the Democrat Party seems to have set it up for Michelle. They removed the first primary out of Iowa, where Michelle would have had to campaign in 100 counties, and they put it in South Carolina, where half the electorate for the Democrat Party primary is going to be African American. It's also a state that Michelle claims as her adopted home state because her grandparents are from there. And in what could not be more obvious, they moved the Democrat National Convention to Chicago, of all places, Michelle's hometown. So I think it's all set up for a Michelle to replace Joe Biden. And I'm predicting that because there's a December 23rd deadline to get on all the primary ballots, that Michelle will declare sometime in November coming up.
And Chris, our producer, is showing your website. What is your website, Joel?
That's going to be MichelleObama24.com. MichelleObama24.com. You can see the movie trailer, read about the book, and link up where you can live stream and buy the book and DVD.
Okay, we'll repeat that again before the end of the show. It's a good website. Let's continue this discussion. Now, if Michelle comes into the race late, all these other candidates, what's Joe Biden's reaction going to be? He's saying he wants to be reelected and wants to be a candidate.
Yeah, I think the Biden administration is largely under Barack Obama's control and that of his prior administration, because about 70% of the people are involved in it. I think when Biden declared for president, you might remember in April, he released a 3-minute video, which is not much of a declaration. He said he's running. Now, since then, he has no campaign office, no campaign manager, does no campaigning. But remember that Susan Rice quit the next day, one of Obama's top lieutenants. So that tells you that maybe Biden was not completely under their control and he wasn't supposed to announce yet or at all. So I think Susan Rice quitting is an interesting sign. Biden may think, hey, it's an easy win. I love the lifestyle. Jill loves the lifestyle. And he figures with all the ballot harvesting around the country that it's an easy win. Why not? Now, I don't think really Biden has to drop out. He's so unpopular. Everyone thinks he's too old. The down ballot Democrats don't want Biden dragging down the ticket. State senator races, congressmen, senators, nobody wants Biden, especially the Democrats. His record is terrible. International economy, border, you name it. Nobody wants Biden. So he doesn't even have to drop out. I think Michelle declares for president. It's been set up for her in South Carolina. If Biden stays in the race, which he can, it won't matter, he'll be trounced in South Carolina and trounced in every other primary until he drops out.
And how about Kamala? What is she going to do in this process? I mean, she's vice president.
Yeah, Kamala is completely irrelevant. Don't forget that Joe Biden was vice president for Obama when Hillary ran, and no one ever heard a word from him. Mostly, it's white Americans and white media commentators that mistakenly believe that Kamala Harris has some measure of support in the black community, which is a key Democrat constituent voting group. They need to have 95% of black voters on board to win elections. In fact, the black community does not have any attachment to Kamala Harris. They do not consider her to be African American. Don't forget her mother's from India and her father's from Jamaica, and she grew up in Canada. So she has no common experiences and nothing in common with the black community at all. So I think she's very unpopular. She never really made it even to the first primary in the presidential race in 2020. So she's completely irrelevant, and I don't think we'd hear a word from her.
It's interesting because this dynamic is going to be almost, in 2000, the last 2000, I guess was 2016, when Hillary Clinton manipulated the primaries so that Bernie Sanders did not have a chance to win the primaries. And that was discovered with Assange's emails. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who was chairman of the DNC, resigned the day the DNC convention, Democrats convention, started in 2016 because the emails exposed that. It sounds like the Democrats again are rigging how the primaries are going to go, or rigging how the election's going to, have Michelle come on stage as this great unifier. Is that your thought on this? I mean, why don't you explain how the staging of this is being planned from in the background?
Well, don't forget the Iowa caucuses requires a number of candidates to campaign in actually 99 counties for months and be heard before voters. They've eliminated that process by moving the first primary. Even Joe Biden admitted that this is to make sure that minority voters have a bigger say in choosing who the nominee would be. So it certainly plays into the hands of Michelle Obama. She would trounce Joe Biden or anyone else in the first primary and move on from there with hundreds of millions of dollars. So I think the Democrat Party has set it up for her. I don't know if Joe was really aware of it when he did it, but it's most certain that Michelle brings to the table, she can appeal to nostalgia. Remember how much you love the Obama years. We never had any scandals. She actually said that in her interview with Oprah when I attended that interview that's now on Netflix. And she'll appeal to how everything is just going so great and will be better. And she's so personally popular, she also solves the big problem of the public largely believing that Democrats fix elections. If they say Joe Biden won and beat Trump on election night, nobody would believe it. Everyone's going to think they cheated again. If Michelle wins, they say Michelle won, we'd say, well, I guess we believe that because she's so popular. Now she's plausible. So she brings to the table and checks all the boxes that Democrats need, especially hanging on to the minority vote. And the reason they're so desperate to do that is because of the inroads that Donald Trump made with minority voters. He brought to the black community a prison reform, strong, robust economy, secure borders, school choice, all the things the Democrats had promised for 60 years but never delivered. He delivered, and they started going over to support Trump. So they believe, therefore, they have to hang on to the black vote. And that's why you see them appointing so many blacks to major positions like the UN ambassador, head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, minority leader in the House, Supreme Court, on and on. Press secretary, their message to black voters is rather insulting. Their message is, we look like you, so you should vote for us. But that's the box that Michelle Obama ticks, and she allows the media to attack Michelle's critics by saying, not only are you racist, but you're also sexist.
It's interesting the way you do your documentaries, and I've been to your many of your premieres and been with you in theaters when you're showcasing your various movies. You always make them a quest. You're on a seeking to find out something, and
right.
And you use the same methodology here. What were you seeking to find out about Michelle?
Well, Michelle had been promoting a story, much like Barack had, about his background that I highly suspected was false. Her story had a lot to do with gender and race. She's been telling these stories for 15 years, that she was held back in life because of her skin color. People told her she couldn't accomplish things, and she was from the south side of Chicago, and she had to overcome all these racial obstacles. And she often tells stories, like one she's been telling for 15 years about how her guidance counselor at her high school told her she shouldn't apply to Princeton because she was black. And I decided to go to Chicago. I spoke to 3 of her boyfriends, her mother, her elementary school teacher, her elementary school classmates, high school classmates, teachers, her Princeton University thesis advisor, you name it. And I got a real picture of Michelle Obama on this journey, and the real picture is vastly different than she has been claiming. She has a background that's just as fabricated as Barack. She has a terrible relationship with the black community in Chicago, and I think that's why she makes up all these lies and about having been held back in life and racially discriminated against. The real story, in brief, is that growing up, Michelle was afraid of black people. She said she was afraid to go out of her house because the kids would beat her up and accuse her of acting white and talking white, which she said meant you think you're better than everybody else. Michelle writes in her book about getting in a fist fight with a girl who kept calling her an Oreo, which is a major racial insult. It means you're black on the outside, but you're really white on the inside. Michelle and her brother were doing white flight in the 70s. Michelle blatantly lies and says that in the 70s, she saw white people moving out of her neighborhood to get away from black people. It's a total lie. 1965 was when South Shore was mostly a Jewish community, and people moved out because of massive crime in the mid-60s. Michelle did not move into that area until 1971 at 6 years old. So it was Michelle Obama and her brother, instead of going 1 block from their house to South Shore High School, for example, which was a good school, but it was all black. Her brother went to a Catholic school for a lot of money, all white, and Michelle went to a magnet school an hour and a half away to avoid studying with blacks. So Michelle was doing white flight. She didn't have any black friends, and the kids called her an Oreo and beat her up. And then Michelle got her revenge on the black community in her professional career. Working for the mayor of Chicago under Valerie Jarrett, she was the assistant planning commissioner, and her job was to kick black people out of their homes. She made 20,000 blacks homeless at Cabrini Green, which was a project because the Democrat Party donor developers like Tony Rezko wanted the land to build housing near downtown. So Michelle kicked these 20,000 people out of their homes and said, it's going to be good for you. The white liberals in Chicago could not hire a white person to make black people homeless. Michelle always filled that role, and she exploited the black community on behalf of white liberals. Having proven she could do the dirty work, she was hired by the University of Chicago Medical Center to head up something called the Southside Health Collaborative. The University of Chicago was losing money because the black Southsiders were showing up at their emergency room in the hospital without insurance. So Michelle's job was to put them in vans and ship them back to the South Side and dump them at these crappy clinics, which I visited, which were horrible. And it was called patient dumping. It was illegal, but Michelle made $300,000 a year to deny access to the black community to healthcare. So she has a horrible history and relationship with the black community, and she doesn't tell us that. She lies and says, I'm from the south side of Chicago. That's all you need to know about me. That's in her, she says that in her movie, the Becoming movie version. In fact, she's not from the south side of Chicago. She's from South Shore, which is an exclusive middle-class community on Lake Michigan. Michelle never suffered discrimination. She went to Paris in high school with her French club. I found out her high school counselor that she claims told her not to go to Princeton because she was black was a church-going black woman named Nan King. And Michelle gets away with these lies because she passed away in 2005. So Michelle, I realized, and I point all this out in the film and the book version as well, that she pretty much tries to manipulate the black community with these phony stories about having suffered discrimination. She wants them to think, hey, I'm just an ordinary black person. I'm just like you. Vote for me. In fact, Michelle ran away from the black community, refused to study with blacks, exploited them in her career. And she tries to exploit them in politics with these phony stories to make them think she's one of them.
Chris is also showing many of the articles you've written. You've written a great number of articles about this and have gotten the idea. I find increasingly a number of people are saying that Michelle could be the candidate. And I think it all traces back to your movie. You were probably, at least in my experience, the first that I recall saying that Michelle was going to be the candidate. In fact, I wasn't convinced of it when you first told me. I had to think about it a while. I came to agree with you, and I found your book and your DVD not only entertaining, but extremely convincing. I mean, you went, one of the things I admire about your work, Joel, is how you go the extra yard. I mean, you even got copies of Michelle's high school yearbooks, which were not easy to find.
Well, I got her high school yearbooks. I got her file, her work file, when she worked for Richard Daley, the mayor of Chicago, out of the city of Chicago archives. I mean, there's nothing I didn't turn over. Like I said, I talked to 3 of her boyfriends. I talked to her mother. I talked to her elementary school 3rd grade teacher, for example. Michelle loves to tell this story about how that when she was in 1st grade, that the teacher was a bad teacher. And she got her mother to come in and pull her and some other kids out of that and skip them forward a grade into 3rd grade. It's a complete fabrication. I spoke to her 3rd grade teacher. She said, absolutely not true. I had Michelle from the beginning of the year. And she said at the end of 1st grade, they had so many people applying to get into this gifted school that she was in because she refused to study with black kids. Her parents put her in this gifted school illegally called Bryn Mawr. She didn't live in that area, and they put her in that school. Michelle's teacher told me that at the end of 1st grade, the kids tested out. If you had high reading skills, they tested you out of 2nd grade, and you moved up to 3rd grade. So it's just one of the many things I uncovered about Michelle's early life and her elementary, high school years and her college years that show everything she's been telling the public about her is meant to manipulate black voters. It's the same as her father did. Her father had a patronage job working for the city of Chicago. The white Democrat Party machine gave him a cushy job, and his job was to convince black voters to come out and keep reelecting the white liberals in Chicago. Michelle's no different. And black voters, if they knew the truth about her, I think black voters are no fools. If they knew the truth about Michelle Obama and how she exploited the black community, they would not support the Obamas.
This is, I think, the key theme of your work here, the book and the movie on Michelle Obama 2024, is that you're making it clear that this is all a facade. This is all a show. It's the constructed reality, like Obama's dreams for my father. And
correct.
The way he portrayed his life story as this father from Africa and living in Indonesia, complex, very well-written story that I'm not entirely sure Barack Obama wrote. In fact, I'm pretty sure he did not write. I think Bill Ayers wrote it. I talked to Bill Ayers about it. Bill Ayers plays around with the idea, teases it. And so does Michelle write her books, or how do her books, is this all a fiction? I mean, is this a fabricated reality we're looking at with Michelle? Yeah,
when politicians write autobiographies, they are political documents meant to retell their story in a way to get voters to support them, to avoid the pitfalls and bad things and create a false reality. We saw Barack Obama did it with his 2 autobiographies. Michelle had a ghostwriter named Sarah Corbett. Ironically, a white lady from New England was chosen to tell and relate to Michelle Obama and tell her story. So Sarah Corbett is the writer, but the intent of Michelle Obama is to retell her story as someone who suffered from racial discrimination and overcame all these obstacles to trick black voters into thinking that she's one of them, when in fact, Michelle was somebody that never had black friends, was afraid of black people, got beaten up by them as a kid and exploited them in her career, married a biracial man. She moved to Hyde Park, which I've got her on tape in my movie. She says, Hyde Park is the best neighborhood. She doesn't say it's South Shore, she doesn't say it's South Side. She wanted to live with white people. She studied at Princeton with all whites. She worked at a law firm, Sidley Austin. One of the big revelations in my film is that I believe Michelle Obama was radicalized by Bernardine Dorn, one of the heads of the Weather Underground domestic terror group, and the wife of Bill Ayers. She worked with Michelle for 2 years at the Sidley Austin law firm. And Barack and Michelle would go to the Ayers-Dorn home in the 90s every week for years for dinner. So when you hear Michelle Obama in 2008 trashing America at all these rallies, I tie that directly to Bernardine Dorn, word for word. Bernardine Dorn in the 60s talked about the politics of fear. It's this whole theory that we're all afraid of each other. And Michelle would promote the idea that you had to elect Barack Obama to help America get over its fear. That came directly from Bernardine Dorn. So I believe Michelle was radicalized by Bernardine Dorn. And you cannot overstate the effect that this couple of domestic terrorists had on the Obamas and on America through them. People don't know also that Michelle was a community organizer for 3 years in Chicago, just like Barack. A lot of people don't know that. She ran an organization called Public Allies, which was a group that would take people that were down and out, former prisoners, high school dropouts, and they would put them to work in the government bureaucracy for 10 months. And 4 days a week, you'd work in the bureaucracy. And 1 day a week, Michelle, or she would bring in Bernardine Dorn to radicalize these workers. It's kind of the idea of the deep state where they get these people to get jobs in the bureaucracy. And when they finish the 10-month program, they get a permanent job in the system. And then they work their way up through the years with these radical ideas. So that's a way of radicalizing the bureaucracy against the United States through Michelle's organizing.
And I think one of the underlying themes that it develops in your book and movie, Joel, is that underneath all this facade, Michelle is still very, very radical. In fact, even perhaps more radical than Barack Obama. Is that true?
Well, both of them had ideological mentors that hated America. Barack was raised by Frank Marshall Davis in Hawaii, the man I maintain and provide a ton of evidence. I believe it's his real biological father. It's a man who looks just like him. And Obama admits he was raised by Frank Marshall Davis. And Davis was a Soviet agent out of Chicago communist that was sent to Hawaii to help start a dock workers strike to expel U.S. naval forces from Hawaii in the 40s. He ended up staying in Chicago and writing for the communist newspaper. So Obama was definitely radicalized by Frank Marshall Davis for years in his formative years. I think Michelle was radicalized by Bernardine Dorn and the relationship she had in her 20s. So they both have different radical influences with the same goal. And that goal is I believe, the breakup of the United States and based on their animosity toward the United States.
And at Princeton, I mean, again, this was a very Ivy League, very privileged school, which he did get into. What was her Princeton experience like?
Well, she got in there with very low test scores. I mean, the worst thing her guidance counselor could have told her was, Michelle, you have low test scores, so you might want to apply to a couple other universities in case you don't get into Princeton. We've all kind of heard stuff like that. Look, at Princeton, she got very low grades in her first semester, which she wasn't used to. She talks in her book about at her high school, she had to work double time to get good grades. Normal students would study 10 hours a week. She'd have to study 20. She talked about how she had to study more to get good grades. At Princeton, with her low test scores and even with her study habits, she got very low grades in the first semester. So she ran away from the curriculum to the sociology department at Princeton, which was very easy relatively compared to anything else. And if that wasn't a big enough cop-out, she then studied African-American studies. Even though she's from a city of 1 million black people, to go to Princeton and study African-American studies was a huge cop-out to get good grades. So I trace her time at Princeton by talking to her thesis advisor, Howard Taylor. And her thesis is pretty famous for, Christopher Hitchens famously joked that it's written in no known language. But I don't think he actually read it. I actually read it. And her thesis is really a cry for help. The thesis is something to do with, she's been in this radical African American studies program for a couple of years, and she thinks it's all BS. She knows that in Chicago, if she worked hard, she can get ahead. But the program was teaching her, you're black, you'll always be black, and no one will ever think of you as anything but black. So after about 3 years of this, she'd had enough of this nonsense, and she did a survey of alumni who had graduated from Princeton who were black, and she asked them, once you got out of this here, were you feeling obligated to the black community, or did you want to go ahead and be successful and do other things? They all said they just wanted to do other things, and she was relieved. So it's a very interesting cry for help, because after this she goes to Harvard, she goes to work at Sidley Austin law firm. She doesn't care about black people at all. She goes on to exploit them, working for the mayor, kick them out of their hospital, working for the University of Chicago Medical Center. So it's a great, interesting study I did of her thesis, and you can learn about it in the book and the film.
Yeah, it's fascinating because, again, the left sharpens these, intensifies, like Saul Alinsky said, it rubs raw these racial issues and divisions. And the entire, I mean, when I remember very well Martin Luther King, saw him in person and followed him very closely in the 60s. And Martin Luther King was always saying we should be colorblind. We should all have the same rights. We all have the same life. We all are on this planet here together. And the race is not the most critical thing that divides people at all. It's superficial.
Right. It's silliness.
And yet, every time we hear either, and continue today with the woke, everything's racist, and your whole presentation of Michelle is the exploiting of race and racial divisions in order for her to propel her personal ambitions. And that's what I'm hearing you say. I'd like you to, what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, look, it's true that the ideal of Martin Luther King, by the strength of your character, not by the color of your skin, is what I was certainly raised on. I grew up in Tennessee in the 70s and 80s, and black and white kids, we were all together. There was never any racial divide whatsoever. I never heard the N-word ever. I'm still friends with black kids from high school. I don't even think that they're black, or they don't even think of me as white. We're just friends. So this is what the Democrat Party kind of resurrected, this idea. Once the racial divide had mostly been solved, they resurrected it to achieve power, because they needed 95% of black voters to endorse their program to take power and maintain power. And so that's what they've been up to. The far left radical socialists have been dividing us on different lines for years, because no one would buy into the socialist nonsense that they are pushing. In the 1930s, they didn't say that they're communist or socialist. They said, we're anti-war. We don't want to get into World War II. In the 60s, well, we're just anti-draft, the Weather Underground. They didn't, if you looked a little closer, you'd see they want to overthrow the United States and replace the Constitution with the Communist Manifesto, but they wouldn't tell you that. They just said, well, we're anti-war. In the 80s is when Barack Obama really was in on it. Once he got out of Columbia, the Democrat Party started this racism thing. Well, we're not socialist or communist. We're just anti-racist. We're anti-racist. Well, everybody's anti-racist. You say, oh, well, that makes sense. So that's what they've been pushing ever since, and very successfully, with Black Lives Matter, which is just a reincarnation of the Weather Underground agenda and Marxist philosophy, where they have the slogan Black Lives Matter, which everybody agrees with. But in reality, it's a far-left radical group hell-bent on the destruction of the United States, using the message of anti-racism and black rights as a way to achieve political ends, which are anti-American.
We've only got a couple of minutes left here, and I want to ask you one more thing. Going back to the Middle East, the Palestinians, the PLO and Palestinian Liberation Organizations, radical terrorist groups have always, I mean, it's almost keeping the Palestinians in the condition of poverty to exploit the cause. They could have improved Gaza enormously, but instead they left the people largely poor. So the Democratic Party continues to exploit the black vote. But when you ask what has the Democratic Party really done to advance the black cause in America, I don't see a lot of improvement since the 1960s, and I don't see the Democratic Party has really come to the aid of the economic condition or the social condition, living condition of blacks, except to radicalize the issue and try to blame whites and gather votes.
It's the Democrat Party themselves that kept the inner cities in poverty for 60 years. They created this problem of, the Lyndon Johnson idea of these welfare payments. It's all from the Democrats that created the problem. And then instead of admitting it and saying, well, we caused all this poverty, we caused all this terrible schools, this horrible education, crime, it's all on us. We've been controlling these inner cities for 60 years. Instead of admitting that and changing their policy, they just blame the United States. They blame racism. Well, where's the racism? They say, oh, it's systemic. It's in the system. Well, where is it? We can't find it. Well, it's just there. I just believe it is. So they're really desperate now. And I think that's where Michelle Obama comes in, she's a very popular figure. She's had 15 years of all positive publicity, hundreds of magazine covers, hundreds of interviews, all positive. She's probably the most popular person in the world. So she'll be a very difficult foe for someone like Donald Trump to deal with politically because she's so popular. I went to her interview with Oprah in LA back in December, and people came 2 hours early. They already had tickets, but they came 2 hours early, were lined up for a mile just to get in. It's like a campaign rally. So I think Donald Trump needs to watch my movie, and he needs to start even now by saying out loud and asking the question to Michelle Obama, Michelle, how much money did you make off of white liberals exploiting the black community in Chicago? Michelle, why did you kick 20,000 blacks out of their homes when you worked for the mayor of Chicago? Michelle, are you going to apologize for what you did to the black community? That will get the ball rolling, and I think black voters' eyes will open because I don't think that they're going to appreciate when they understand that Michelle Obama really is an Oreo, what the girls used to call her growing up. She really is an Oreo. She didn't want to be black. She never wanted anything to do with black people. She never had any black friends. And I don't think they'll like being exploited politically by someone with such a horrible record in her life history of dealing with the black community.
And finally, at the point of your book and movie on Michelle Obama 2024, is that it's the truth will set you free. In other words, what you're saying is, here's the truth about Michelle. And if the country knew the truth, they would not vote for her.
Yeah, I wrote, there's a little slogan on the DVD cover there on the website. It says, only the truth can stop her, because the truth is devastating for Michelle Obama. And that's why she's worked so hard to create these phony stories. She doesn't know how to even do it properly. She exaggerates. You might remember when she did an interview with Barack in 60 Minutes in 2008, she said, Barack can get shot just going to the gas station because he's a black person. She just doesn't know. So she makes these things up that are so exaggerated. Also, I show in the film how she uses everything she can to manipulate voters. She was the top 25 international best dressed list for Vanity Fair in 2005. She's had a celebrity hairdresser who I interviewed from when she was in high school. She hit the Miracle Mile in Chicago. She bought all the fancy clothes from the designers like Ikram Goldman and Maria Pinto. She shows up on the campaign trail for Barack Obama dressed as a homeless person. She doesn't comb her hair. She wears an old t-shirt or an old sweater. She's trying to look like what she thinks a black housewife might look like in the 50s. It's pretty insulting, but she uses everything. Fashion, doesn't comb her hair. You can see in my movie, she puts on a phony urban accent when she talks to a black audience. It's pretty insulting. If a white person did what she did, they'd be arrested for a hate crime. But Michelle is a big phony, and her entire family history from her father was manipulating black voters. And she did it for Barack in 2008 to try to convince them that Barack was black, because they didn't believe it. They thought he was a biracial man from a white family in Hawaii and Indonesia, which he was. He never had anything to do with black people. So Michelle manipulated them to vote for Barack. And I think she's been working on her own candidacy for 4 years with all these efforts to manipulate minorities to support her for president in 2024.
Well, thank you, Joel. My guest today has been Joel Gilbert, and his book and movie are Michelle Obama 2024, her real life story and plan for power. I solidly recommend that everybody get the DVD and watch it and read the book. If you want to know, that's the book right there. The truth, this is the Truth Central, and Joel is telling the truth here. He's done the research. He's been there. The film, you can see him go through this odyssey. You go ahead, Joel.
Yeah, you go to salemnow.com. You can live stream the movie on salemnow.com. You can live stream the movie on Amazon Prime Video, and the book and the DVD are on amazon.com.
Great. So they're easy to get a hold of, and you really need to spend the time to learn the truth about Michelle. And what Joel has done with his book and movie is give you the truth, and it's a very entertaining fashion. I guarantee you, you'll be captivated watching the DVD, because Joel goes to all the places in Michelle's life and shows you where she's been. I mean, you're watching him interview people who were central to Michelle's life for all these years, back to her grade school teachers, her boyfriends. I mean, it's a fascinating movie, Joel, and I commend you for having put it together.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me, Jerry, and we'll do it again as things develop.
Okay, so this is the Truth Central. I say in the end, God always wins. God will win here too. It's going to be a very important election. And I encourage everybody to be involved. Joel, thank you. And we'll be back. This is Dr. Jerome Corsi. Today is Friday. It's October 13th, 2023. We'll be back on Monday. Join us. We're doing podcasts every weekday on the Truth Central. Thank you for joining us. God bless.